Hi, I'm Nicole Ferraro, and this is The Divide, a podcast from Light Reading exploring the ongoing digital divide, why and where it still exists, and what needs to be done to get people everywhere connected to reliable, high-speed internet. Today, I'm joined by Michael Philpott, Research Director at Omdia. He and I discuss Omdia's 2021 Fiber Development Index, which shows that by 2026, 70% of the global population will be connected to the internet, but only 40% will have a fixed broadband connection at home. Michael and I discussed the rate of fiber deployment all over the globe and why we should be concerned about growing speed and service inequalities, and what policies and partnerships are successfully fueling fiber in the countries where it's growing the fastest. Michael, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
No problem. Nice to be here.
So you guys recently released your fiber development index analysis for 2021. Can you share with me a little bit about that, some high level findings and what you guys are looking at in that report?
Yeah. So basically, we look at the importance of investing in greater fiber deployments, both not just in the access network, which a lot of it gets a lot of attention, but across the whole of the network, because we recognize that it's only by investing in advanced fiber technology in the core network, in the backhaul network, and in the access network where it's relevant, do you get the best overall quality of experience. And that goes for mobile users as well. There's not much point rolling out 5G technologies, if the backhaul is then not based on fiber technology. So that's why we take this kind of more comprehensive view. And it all ties back into, which I know you guys talk about a lot, about the digital divide, because we've been covering the digital divide for many, many years. And it used to be about, and some people still think it's about just being connected. That's the whole focus, is just getting people connected. But with broadband, quality really matters, as we know, because the better the quality of the network, the more you can kind of do with it, both from a consumer perspective, but also from an enterprise perspective. And that, from an enterprise perspective, it kind of stimulates greater innovation and greater efficiency. So it enables businesses to grow. And there's a lot of work and a lot of evidence that supports that. But if you don't take quality into account or take it seriously, then what you can end up with is kind of a two-tier system, or a new kind of divide based on digital applications. You'll get some people that can get access to all the application services out there because they have ultra high fast, ultra low latency networks, and people that can't, even though they're connected, they just can't get access to the same. So that's why we put a lot of work into this.
Got it. So yeah, what your report really highlights is that as we know, within the digital divide, there are many divides. And one divide that is emerging is a global fiber divide, it seems. So what are the larger implications of that if we keep it up as it is right now? We keep that divide growing across the world of who has fiber and who doesn't.
Yeah, it's not that it's not that we think of it as a fiber divide. It is that quality, and although there are other technologies out there that have a role in the market and kind of course help, because being connected is better than not being connected. Being connected to let's say a very efficient, reasonable, good XDSL based network is better than being connected through some other. So all technologies do have a role in it. So we recognize that. It's just that the fiber is the ultimate in terms of quality and what it can deliver in a consistent way, because a lot of these applications that we're running, things that we're doing today, but also if you think about, the gamers these days, they're online for hours on end. And so it's fiber is the best at providing that quality in a consistent way, and that's what's going to become important as we move to all the new types of next generation applications with XR technology, etc. So that's why fiber becomes so important in the future.
So, from your findings, which countries are doing this well right now?
We have an index that maps currently 80 countries. and we kind of split it into three groups, if you like. You can have the leading countries such as the South Koreas, Singapore, and increasingly China, who's been accelerating up the ranks in recent years. So you kind of have what we call the fiber leading countries, and then we have the second group, which contains that's where you get a lot of European countries coming in, leading countries such as Portugal, Spain, Switzerland, etc. And they're kind of countries that have moved to fiber, got a reasonable coverage now, but really start to need to adopt more advanced fiber technologies to bring kind of gigabit speeds into reality. And then we have kind of the third group, which represents what people would class as emerging broadband markets, but also includes countries which many people would consider to be fairly developed broadband countries, such as the UK is a great example where I live, but really behind in terms of their fiber development. And it's really interesting to see some of those, what people class as be emerging countries, that have taken this fiber first attitude. So, they've done really well to be in the position they are, because they've kind of moved to this fiber as a first technology rather than moving through all the different technologies as we go.
The US is on that emerging list as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because and that's why it's important to look at where countries come from, and we do a lot of that analysis. We do recognise that countries have a different history and have developed in different ways, so you have to recognise that therefore they have different challenges. To come up with sensible conclusions and also sensible recommendations, you have to understand where a country currently is and where they've come from. So you're quite right. The US is in that kind of third category, along with the UK and other, as I say, highly developed countries such as Germany. But that's because historically, they've also had, these countries typically had a kind of a cable history to them.
Right.
They have significant cable networks, significant cable investments. And those networks, of course, are capable of providing, high-speed broadband services in their own right, and operators have been quite right in investing in that technology. As long as that provides the kind of service to their customers. But you're starting to see those cable operators now recognise that as they move from DOCSIS 3 to DOCSIS 4, that it might be a better investment to put that into optical fiber in the long run. So you even could see those. Well, you are starting to see those cable operators pivoting towards fiber rollouts too, and therefore you'd see those countries rocket up the rankings because of that.
Here in the U.S., we recently signed legislation that's going to invest $65 billion into broadband. There was a large debate within the industry and at the policy level about whether or not to mandate that goes to full fiber or to take a tech neutral approach. And essentially, a tech neutral approach won out, although there is an incentive to try to create future-proof technology. But the mandate still relegates broadband speeds to about 120. Do you see that as a policy mistake for the U.S., or is that just part of, like you said, our history of having to bring our infrastructure up to speed?
I guess what I would say is that it's important that governments start to take a long-term view in this, and also not to take not to look at things from a national level. I think it's quite easy to look at compare fiber deployment with things like national GDP, and you can kind of come to some conclusions that investing in fiber technology in these more rural or harder to reach technologies don't have the same cost benefit that they do in more urban areas, because it's cheap on a per customer basis in more urban areas. So you can make these decisions that we don't need to do that because it's not going to be as cost benefit as in other areas, but that's not taking a longer term view, and it's also not taking a localized view, because there's lots of studies out there that show that the benefits to local areas from ultra fast broadband and ultra low latency in the long run will bring benefits to those local areas, which don't really just a blip if you think about it on a national level. So So that's what we're recommending governments do, is take that real long-term view and plan for the future. And I say, although those other technologies do have a role and can be part of your strategy, you must take that long-term view so that you think we must get to a stage where at some point in the future, every household has this technology which gives them the same opportunity, wherever they live in that country.
Gotcha. So sticking with that and broadening it out beyond the U.S., going back to the whole globe, what recommendations does your report make for policy as well as for the industry at large with regard to how to scale up deployment and development of fiber over the next 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, we've recently done a survey actually of service providers around the globe, looking at what their priorities are, but also what could be of most help. Because I think a lot of times people think it's just about funding. You mentioned the funding that the US government is plowing into broadband. We've seen that in other countries too. And although of course funding is important, when you get all operators will need help at some point as they get to these more harder to reach areas. But actually, what we found was that funding was quite low down actually on the list of their needs, and it's often about other things that regulators and governments can do to help them create the business model. Sometimes it's just by introducing enabling flexibility, for example, around partnerships, allowing agreements between players such as co-financing and more collaborative models. And we found things like facilitating the deployment through municipality approvals, so just making things that are a little bit easier, but a bit more efficient for them. And then, of course, providing financial support through investment support or incentives and subsidies where needed. And then finally, implementing regulatory flexibility, including removal of outdated and what we now consider to be non-essential regulations. The regulations that basically were designed for a different world, if you like, and we should perhaps need new regulations that are looking perhaps more futuristic and helping operators roll out these broadband networks for the benefit of us all.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, for taking the time to share your findings with us today. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you again, Michael, for joining me. Thank you as well to our producer, Pierre Landriau, for making this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Light Reading Podcast for more episodes of The Divide, as well as interviews and insights from the Light Reading team. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.